Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 21st pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got a big week ahead of us here from an NFL draft standpoint. A lot of news to hit on, and we will hit on it right after our first segment here as we once again start the show with Scout Stories, where Eagles Assistant Director of Player Personnel, Cunningham, drops by to talk about the Eagles tight end, Dallas Goedert, when he was coming out of school back in the 2018 NFL Draft. What were some of the biggest traits that attracted the Eagles to Goedert, and how can we project that moving forward? We will hit on that right at the top of the show. After that, we transition to Draft Buzz, where Ben, Fennell, Dane, Brugler, and I took a look at a big week ahead. Again, the Underclassmen deadline is today, Monday, as we're recording this. The Senior Bowl, just a week away, and we've got some big things to talk about on that front. And we will also talk through some player comparisons, a little bit of a fun conversation there. We'll do all of that in Draft Buzz before we transition to On the Clock, where this week we've got a new take on this segment. Gone is the debate style of the program, and now we're going to start making some actual picks for some teams, start playing matchmaker a little bit throughout the NFL draft. So stay tuned for that segment later in the show. We'll wrap things up with Draft Mailbag. We hit on a couple of comments from you at home, 3 of you, in fact. And like we said, we're always going to answer your questions if you go and leave them on our Apple Podcast page. And since we hit on 3 of them here at the end of today's show, guess what? The queue is empty. That means if you go to Apple Podcasts, you leave a question, you leave a mock draft, you leave a segment request, you leave anything you want, any kind of comment about the draft, about the show, we will get to it right here on the very next show. So all you have to do is go into Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. I appreciate everybody that has done that. It's the best way for us to kind of promote the show and make the show a little bit more visible to everybody all across NFL fandom. So really appreciate everybody that has taken that time. Now, that being said, we're going to kick things off, like I said, going to Scout Stories. We're going to jump back to February of 2018. It's time for Scout Stories.
Pull up a seat. It's time for Scout Stories.
Well, happy to be joined this week by Eagles Assistant Director of Player Personnel, Cunningham, to talk about Eagles tight end Dallas Goedert. Now, it's been a couple years in the league, former second-round pick out of South Dakota State. Take us back in time a little bit. What was your feeling, your projection on Dallas when he was coming out, and take us a little bit inside the evaluation?
You know, Fran, I remember watching TCU. I believe it was 2016. South Dakota State played at TCU, and it was Dallas's junior year. And there was a guy at South Dakota State that kept flashing on tape. I was actually watching TCU tape, and I was like, who is this guy? They ended up having him, Dallas, and another, actually a receiver the following year. And then fast forward to the 2017 season, thinking that I was going to be able to see him in Frisco at the championship game. Unfortunately, they lost to JMU that year, but was really excited to be able to go see him there because I wasn't able to get to South Dakota State during the fall. And then fast forward then to the Senior Bowl. And at the Senior Bowl, you get to see him finally get to see what he looks like in person, how he looks in his pads, how he moves around. It was good to see him for a short period of time because he got hurt at the Senior Bowl. And then you go to the combine, same thing. He wasn't able to go through the combine drills, but we did get a chance to interview him at the combine, get a chance to sit down and get to know him a little bit, and obviously on the 30 visit. But, watching Dallas and evaluating him, you saw a big physical specimen at the tight end position to play what we call an F tight end. He was outside in the slot, but then you had a couple plays where you saw him in line as a blocker. And you projected, hey, this guy could be a Y for us as well, or a complete tight end. And that's what you're really looking for. In that year, it was him and a couple of other players as one of the top tight ends coming out. And just evaluating him against that talent at South Dakota State, you wanted to see if he could dominate that level of talent, and he did. And then fast forward, kind of going back and looking at the TCU game, he dominated the talent at TCU as well. So it was good to watch him and good to be able to evaluate him because you were able to see the things that we were needing to see if he was going to be able to translate on our level. And we got to see that at South Dakota State and versus TCU as well.
I remember one of the big narratives about Dallas, when he was coming out was, great pass catcher, but what can he be as a blocker? He wasn't asked to do it. And I remember talking with Eagles tight ends coach Justin Peel after the draft, and it was like, all right, well, let's pull a couple plays where you can kind of see the flashes. But at this kid, he's 6'5", 6'6", he's 255. Like, we can coach that into him. And I guess it goes back to that discussion of, it's not what just because you weren't asked to do it often in college doesn't mean you can do it or you can't do it in the NFL. He comes in the league and becomes one of the best blocking tight ends, certainly in the NFL in short order.
Correct. You just want to look for the body control, the balance, the core strength, the movement off the snap. If he's what we call, can he uncoil his hips? Can he unlock his hips? Obviously, the technique work. That's why we have a coach like Coach Peel, who's outstanding. He's going to get him technically sound, and he's going to develop him. And that's what he did with Dallas, because he's really turned himself into a complete tight end.
Well, Ian, thanks you so much for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Again, stay safe, stay healthy. We'll talk to you soon, man.
Talk to you soon. You too.
Well, great stuff there, as always, from Ian. And 3 big takeaways for me, just kind of listening back to that interview. Number 1, talking about how important it was to be able to see Dallas in person at the Senior Bowl, getting a chance to see what he looks like in person, how he looks in pads, how he moves around. Why is that important? To me, it's an important part. It's obviously a big, important part of the process, and it's a big part of what scouts are trying to do. A lot of times, scouts, they're not necessarily worried about the technique stuff. You heard him talk about it as a blocker, and he was talking about Dallas Goedert, and he showed the strength and the athleticism, the balance and body control, all that. His technique needed work, but you had the traits to be able to say, yeah, this guy can turn into a good blocker. It's the same thing when scouts are looking at these guys, they're trying to really try and profile their body type. They're looking at how their body is constructed. Where can they add weight? Where are they not going to be able to add weight? Where are they maxed out at? How do they move? All the different little delineations in terms of their athleticism, both straight line and lateral from side to side. You're trying to get in all those little things that you necessarily can't always see on film from an eagle eye view all the way up high in the sky. So you're trying to make sure you take all of those notes down when you see a guy in person, and obviously all the other little body language stuff that you can't necessarily see on the film as well. So that's always a big thing, and especially in this season, by the way, because we're going to talk about a big announcement when it comes to the Senior Bowl, and I'm going to say why I think that's important for this year, and I'll kind of dip into that a little bit now. This year, with the uncertainty around what is the combine going to look like, what are the pro days going to look like, you may not have too many opportunities to get in front of NFL decision makers. This might be one of your only shots this offseason to do that. So any guy that's got that ability to say, hey, you couldn't see me this fall. You couldn't see me in practice. You couldn't see me at a game. Maybe my team, we didn't allow NFL scouts in the building, or we only allowed a certain amount of scouts in the building at any given time for a game day. Not everybody got eyes on every single player this fall. It's just a unique year when it comes to this draft process. So all these guys that are trying to take that next step, trying to go to the Senior Bowl, this is a good opportunity for that. And I thought that it was timely that we got to hear Ian talk about that in regards to Dallas Goedert. And then the other big part of that was just seeing him dominate at a lower level of competition, but namely how he first flashed to him versus a bigger opponent in TCU, right? And that happens all the time, where you're watching somebody, you might be watching somebody from one team on defense, and there's an offensive player, a receiver, or an offensive lineman, or a quarterback that flashes, and you're like, man, who is this guy? And it's always great when you're watching a lower level of competition and the guy flashes as soon as you turn the tape on. There are some people that believe, hey, when you're watching a guy from a smaller school, don't even look up the number. Don't try and figure out who he is beforehand. Just turn the film on and see if he stands out. If he stands out as he sets himself apart from everybody else around him, well, now you're really cooking with somebody that could potentially move on to the NFL. And I think that was kind of cool to be able to hear Ian say, yeah, he stood out when I was watching TCU the year before. And that certainly speaks to the physical talent that Dallas Goedert is and was when he was coming out of South Dakota State. So a couple big takeaways there. Hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Ian Cunningham. Let's now get into some of the big news of the week. It's time now for Draft Buzz.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
All right, well, let's get into this week's action here on Draft Buzz, where I welcome in Dane, Brugler, Ben Fennell. Guys, divisional round is over in the NFL playoffs, and the Senior Bowl is just a week away. The Underclassmen deadline is today, literally Monday afternoon. There's a lot going on in the NFL landscape. How you guys doing?
Good. We've had some good football in the NFL level, and it's been fun to watch these playoffs. Now, not as fun for some of us here in the Cleveland area, but still, it was a good season for the Browns. And I mean, you just look at the 4 quarterbacks we have left. I mean, that kind of says a lot.
I would agree. Some of the best individual seasons at the quarterback position.
And this was our first full week without college football for the last 4 or 5 months. It's kind of sad. I've been sitting here listening to Sarah McLachlan all day.
But at least we're getting some FCS action back here soon. At least we're hoping to, because it looks like some of those dates are even starting to get altered a little bit. But guys, let's start talking about some of the things going on in the NFL draft community, because today, as I mentioned, is the underclassmen deadline. Now, we got some news from Ohio State. Looks like Justin Fields officially entering this draft. As of this recording, we're still waiting on some other big names. But late last week, Alabama, just the floodgates open, and this happens at Alabama almost on a yearly basis. But quarterback Mac Jones, wide receiver Jalen Waddle, defensive tackle Christian Barmore, linebacker Dylan Moses, corner Patrick Surtain, all declare for the draft. And so here's my question for you, as we because we're going to get the full list and the official list later this week. But just looking at the Crimson Tide, I'm going to set it over under there. 3.5 first-round picks just from those 5 names I just set there. Dane, you taking the over or the under?
I'm going to take the over. 3.5 that's the right number, because I think we can feel confident about Waddle, Surtain, and Barmore. But then that fourth, I don't think Dylan Moses makes it. That fourth will come down to Jones. And right now, I'll say he sneaks in there. I think there's so many teams in that late first that could be enticed to do it. The Saints being one of them, I think would be the perfect landing spot. Maybe there's a team in the early second that could trade up, like a Carolina or a Denver or Detroit, or one of those teams that maybe doesn't get their guy in the top 10. Maybe they go and get that 5th-year option with Jones. He's such a challenging evaluation, but something that would really help if he decides to accept his Senior Bowl invite, which I know we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Ben, you taking the over or the under?
That's a tough one for me. I don't think I see Christian Barmore squeezing in the first round. I think he's going to be an early round 2 guy, like in that Kawan Short kind of ballpark, right in the low 40s. But this is a list not including Devontae Smith or Alex Leatherwood or some other guys that I think are going to be in the first round. So just looking at these guys, I'm probably going to go with the under. I'm going to go with Waddle, obviously, Surtain. I think Mac Jones probably makes it in there, but I'm not seeing Christian Barmore or Dylan Moses as first-round picks.
Interesting. Well, let's get into
surprising.
Yeah, it's Barmore certainly be a guy that we spend a lot of time talking about here in the coming weeks. Obviously, we have not done, each of us individually have not done all the work yet on all of these underclassmen. So of the names that have come out recently, is there a guy that you're most excited to start digging a little bit deeper into the film on, Ben? I'll go with you first. Is there a guy that you're just excited? Look, maybe you've done surface level, information gathering or taking a look at some clips here and there, but you're excited to kind of do a deep dive on here in the coming weeks?
I'm ready to kind of peel back some layers of this edge group, which is really not defined at the top. There's no Chase Young or a Bosa or Myles Garrett dominating the conversation. And it's very fluid right now, whether it's, Gregory Rousseau or Kwity Paye at the top. But there's a lot of just interesting guys in this hopper, whether it's Jason Oweh, the freak athlete, no production, Joseph Asai, like where are we playing him at the next level? Joe Tryon opted out. What does his tape look like a year later? And how about these Florida State edges? Janarius Robinson, Josh Cantrell, their tape is horrible at times, but these guys are incredible specimens, incredible athletes. I think Janarius Robinson's heading down to the Senior Bowl next week, so I'm excited for that opportunity. But 2 guys whose college careers certainly didn't go as planned since being top recruits, but they have a lot of potential and a lot of ability.
Dane, is there a guy that stands out for you?
Yeah, there is. TCU safety, but not the one, we talk the most about. But the one I want to see more of is our Darius Washington. Trevon Moehrig, probably going to be the first TCU safety drafted, but he's not going to be the only one. Washington, I think, is going to be drafted, but it's trying to figure out where. He's so interesting because he's athletic in coverage. He's tough versus the run. There's a lot to like about, his ball hawking skills, his awareness, but he's tiny. He's listed at 5'8", so probably 5'7.5", or we'll see exactly what he is height-wise. But from what I've seen up to this point, he's just a really intriguing nickel defender. That's where I think he'd fit best. But the lack of length, it shows up from time to time, and so I want to see more, and just to figure out where to value a player like this.
There's some people questioning his speed as well. He showed up on the freak list for a lot of weightlifting stuff and vertical jumps. There's some rumors he's like a 4.55 guy. So at 5'8", 179, reminds me a little bit of Nickel Roby-Coleman coming out of USC several years ago, who also didn't test particularly well, had the small frame, but is a pretty good, feisty nickel corner that played some good ball for us in Philly.
All right. Well, I'll wrap it up. I talk about the Stanford quarterback, Davis Mills. I love watching quarterbacks. I love seeing guys that, have that ability to make the jump to the NFL. And Mills, throwing his name into the ring, obviously started only a couple games here this year, missed a couple, I think was with a concussion early on. I don't think it was COVID early for him, but I know he missed a couple starts early in the season. Obviously a very abridged season for, playing out West in the Pac-12, and it was only a half-year starter last year. So small sample size for Davis Mills. But a talented kid. We got some buzz here on the show about him early in the season, early back in the summer. But I'm excited to kind of dive into his tape. I haven't watched a lick of him, so I am excited to dig into Davis Mills. I know he's had some other of his teammates enter the draft as well. So excited to kind of dig into his.
It shouldn't take too long. He only has 11 career starts and 820 career snaps, so you should be able to fly through that over lunch.
Have either of you guys done him at all?
Yeah, I watched him last week.
I've only done one game, but I was really, really intrigued. I mean, he's a big athletic passer. There's a lot of tools there that you can work with. It's just trying to figure out, what's his mental development? What's his ceiling as a quarterback? When Desmond Ridder went back to school, I think Davis Mills became that intriguing third, fourth rounder type, the intriguing developmental guy that maybe, because a lot of these guys, Kyle Trask and Ellinger, like we know who they are. I don't think there's much mystery there. With a guy like Mills, there's potential there. I don't think he's anywhere close to his ceiling. It's just trying to figure out what is that ceiling and what's it going to take for him to reach that.
I guess, Fran, I watched him last week real quick. Yeah. I thought he reminded me of just a slightly shorter version of Zach Mettenberger.
Okay.
Coming at LSU. He's tall, strong arm, effortless, can make all the throws around the field, heavy play action, can turn his back to the defense with those under center elements, really good bounce in his drops with his knees bent. He's never stale. He moves pretty good. He just doesn't have a whole lot of experience to kind of evaluate. Split some time last year with KJ Costello. He was supposed to be the guy this year, but obviously Pac-12's schedule got cut in half. And since being that 5-star number one player in Georgia, number one pro style quarterback that everybody in the SEC wanted, just really hasn't had that college career we expected.
I guess really it ultimately comes down to which bucket does he end up falling into? Is he in that like Mac Jones, Kyle Trask bucket of like that guy just past the top four? Or is he more in that like Sam Ehlinger and you start talking about the other guys that are, towards the bottom there, the guys that are going to end up down at the Senior Bowl, whether you're talking about the Jamie Newmans and the Kellen Monds of the world, it'll be interesting. I'm excited to dig in more into his tape. Speaking of the Senior Bowl, big announcement here for the program as they're able to get Devontae Smith to go down to the Senior Bowl. Now, Jim Nagy did clarify on Monday morning that he will not take part in practice. The thumb injury that he sustained in the national title game is going to keep him from partaking on the field, but he will be present. He's going to go through all the activities. He will be able to meet with teams. So just a big get overall, obviously, for the Senior Bowl and a good opportunity for Devontae Smith. Ben, what was your initial reaction when you saw the news on Monday morning?
Well, Jim Nagy, once again, just giving an opportunity to a player that we don't know anything about, just can get an opportunity to show out down in Mobile. This Devontae Smith kid, we don't really know what he can do at the next level or, his body of work. So I'm really excited what he brings down to Mobile.
Yeah, and they got a big one last week, too, from Alex Leatherwood, his teammate from Alabama as well. Dane, another Alabama teammate you kind of alluded to earlier. We're still waiting on the redshirt junior quarterback, Mac Jones. Do you kind of feel like he could end up in Mobile when it's all said and done?
Well, yeah, I mean, as of this taping, we have not heard yet. He has his invite. He has yet to make an official decision. And I confirmed that as of this morning. So as an evaluator, you're hoping he goes and competes because you want to see him detached from that Alabama situation. It's like, you ever seen the movie The Departed? The opening line from Jack Nicholson's character in that movie, I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me. That's the Mac Jones conundrum. Figuring out where he fits on that spectrum. Him being at the Senior Bowl would give us a different vantage point to, kind of best understand how much of Alabama's success was him being very efficient with his reads, his throws. And then how much was he was simply a product of his environment and the supporting cast that he had. So, I think that Mac Jones going down to Mobile will certainly help evaluators figure that out and ultimately, figure out what to grade him with. One other thing with Devontae Smith, just a brilliant move on his part and, his representation. We don't know, what the combine is going to look like.
No question.
It might be all interviews might be Zoom. Who knows? Jamar Chase might not get any one-on-one time with the Miami Dolphins, who have the 3rd overall pick, but you know who will? Devontae Smith. He will be able to be with the Dolphins coaching staff throughout the week and just get that face time that a lot of these other players in the top 10, especially a Jamar Chase or a Jalen Waddle as juniors, they won't have that opportunity. So just a really smart, shrewd move by Devontae Smith to go down to Mobile. Doesn't have to worry about getting hurt as he kind of comes back from that finger injury, but just a really smart move on his part.
That departed quote was beautiful. When did you come up with that?
That's what I was going to say. Like, is that please tell me that's the first time you've rolled that out. Please tell me.
It is. I watched Departed last week and it just was fresh in my mind. So yeah, I'll probably, use it again because I did like it. But
Dane is such a draft guy. You can put on The Departed and be like, oh, that quote right there, that is so
Mac Jones. Yeah, that's it.
That was outstanding. To me, like that's why the Devontae Smith. People will. There were all kinds of people in my mentions. After I retweeted it this morning, saying, "Oh, like why would he do this? It's an injury risk." I'm with you, Dan. That this is especially this year in this climate. This is the time for those guys. If you had an invite to go to Mobile and you didn't take it, you might be out of luck in terms of getting any kind of one-on-one time with any kind of decision maker here throughout the pre-draft process. Because as it was broken by Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated over the weekend, the combine is very likely not going to look the way that we've seen it over the years, and it'll be closer to what we saw during the pre-draft process last year. A lot of virtual meetings. It looks like there's going to be lots of regional combines, so there'll be less travel. Dane, what are you hearing about what the combine could look like, and what that means, obviously for players and for teams as well?
Yeah, and talking to agents and scouts, everyone's basically in the dark, waiting for national and the NFL to come up with a plan. There's a lot of frustrated people behind the scenes who, some of them saying the NFL should have decided this already. It's not like they haven't had time. I think obviously the focus has been let's figure out how to get through the season first and foremost. And it sounds like the most logical thing is for there to be regional combines where players can get medicals done, psychological done. We'll see what athletic testing they're able to do. All I know is it's going to be strange without that annual trip to Indianapolis, which, it's a huge piece of the draft process, and it's just going to be missing. And we'll have to try and supplement that in other ways. So it's just going to be a really interesting next few months, which, to your point, just makes the Senior Bowl all that more important because even though the Senior Bowl will be a little different this year in terms of access and weigh-ins and things like that, there's still going to be 3 days of full practice on the field that we'll be able to evaluate and take advantage of.
Ben, last year, there were a bunch of changes to the combine in the days leading up. They changed a bunch of the drills last second, and it was like it was right before, COVID kind of closed down the United States. So not surprised that we're at this point and there's still so much uncertainty considering there was the uncertainty last year. And it was
but a lot of those,
as usual.
Those changes last year weren't COVID related. So it's definitely keeping us on our toes. But a couple consider one, NCAA deciding that they're going to go with the bubble for March Madness in Indianapolis has been a huge factor in a lot of the planning. Obviously, bringing 64 teams into Indianapolis in a hotbed bubble is really going to conflict with the ability to construct the combine in late February, early March as well. So it's a little bit of playing nice with the NCAA basketball side of things, and whether you want to let them come in first, the NFL comes in after, whether you try to play nice simultaneously. The other thing is, the combine and the league have been asking teams and scouting departments two things. What do they need and what do they want? And you really want to try to accommodate the things they need and then really pick apart the things that they want. So the things they need across the board have been medicals.
Yep.
That's the most important. That's why the combine was originated in the mid 80s, was to streamline medicals rather than flying these kids around the country to 32 teams. So we want to have some sort of streamlined medical process. Now, the thing is, a lot of these kids already gather at their training facilities in Arizona, California, Texas, Florida, whether it's, Exos, Athletes First, D1, whoever does these combine and professional trainings, that they're already, congregations of prospects. So would it make more sense to have them continue to congregate at those facilities and then have the NFL representatives show up there, which is being a huge talked about aspect. But as far as coverage of the event, as far as fan involvement, as far as exposure, all certainly up in the air at the moment.
Yeah, the medical aspect of it certainly is the one that I think teams are most focused on, is how do we best make that a streamlined process? We're not going to have everybody in one place, but, can we make it so there's 5 places, 6 places? That'll certainly help kind of ease the concern from a team standpoint.
And that's so important for fans, Fran, because that's the one thing you don't see. That's the one thing you don't see on TV. So the fans' perspective, it's everything on the field matters. The drills matter. The metrics matter. It really doesn't. I love showing it. I love being a part of the broadcast. I love the entertainment aspect of it. We all love it. That's what fans think the combine is about, but it really isn't. And the fact that all the teams immediately said, what do they need? Their first thing, and pretty much the only thing they said as far as needs, medicals.
Yeah, it's it's going to be a fluid situation. We're sitting here in the middle of January. Usually this does not take place until late February, early March. And like I said earlier, things changed in terms of like the times and everything, literally like a couple of weeks before last year's combine. So plenty of time for things to be affected here in the lead up to what that event usually gets rolled out to be. So guys, let's now just kind of touch base. Who are some guys, and we'll do our film room recap every single week, just a player that we've studied on film over the last week that caught your eye. Dane, I'll let you kick things off. Who's a guy that has really kind of caught your eye from your film study over the last week or so?
I'm going to go with Richie Grant, one of the more underrated safeties in this class. And, I did work on him over the summer and then earlier this year, and I liked him. He's been in my top 10 safeties, but the more I really dove in, I loved him even more. This is a 3-year starter. He was first team all AAC all 3 years, led the team in tackles twice. He accounted for 17 turnover-worthy plays the last 3 years. He had 10 interceptions, 7 forced fumbles. He's a former pass catcher in high school, and you see that. He does receiver-like things down the field at the catch point. The play speed, that really jumped off the film to me. He only gave up 3 touchdowns the last 2 years, which is impressive as a field safety. Does he have some inconsistency issues he needs to iron out? Yeah, but the range, the ball hawking tendencies are there. I think he could be a single high or split safety very early in his career. So I see a top 100 guy in a safety that doesn't get nearly enough attention.
He had a play. I can't remember which game it was that I watched, but it was like the opening drive of it was either Memphis or Georgia Tech. He came down, ran the alley, and smacked a ball carrier in the flat. It was one of the best one-on-one plays I've seen from a safety all year. A little bit undersized. I am excited to see ultimately how he tests, though, this spring. I think that's going to be something I'll be really interested to look at with him overall.
There was another play from that Memphis game where there was a play up the gut, and he chased down the runner, forced the fumble, and caused a turnover where that showed some of the play speed and some of his ability just to be a playmaker. So yeah, Richie Grant is a safety that I think if there's, I don't know, maybe like I'm not saying they're very similar players, but if there's like a Julian Blackmon in this class, a safety that doesn't get a ton of love. And part of it was Blackman's injury and this and that. But, I think Grant's one of those guys that's not being talked about a ton, but, could be a surprise with how early he's drafted and then what type of rookie season he has.
A little bit of a tease. Next week, I've alluded to the fact that the Senior Bowl coverage will look a little bit different for this podcast. Dane will be on the ground down there in Mobile. I will not be, but I am bringing on some coaches to talk about some of the players that are there, and I will be talking with Central Florida's defensive backs coach, and we'll talk about Richie Grant a little bit more. So stay tuned for that next week. Ben, who's the guy that stood out to you over the last week of film study?
Well, we'll stay right here in the safety category. Thanks for setting that up, Dane. How about Jamie Sherwood at Auburn? Either of you guys watched this kid yet?
I have not done Sherwood yet.
Yeah, because he just declared officially a couple of days ago. He's interesting. I've talked to some scouts who think he should bulk up more and be a linebacker because he was heavy this year. He looked like he was 220, 225. He looked a little heavy, which kind of it confused his evaluation with what's the best way to use him.
Yeah, and the first note I have is the size of a linebacker playing safety. He was every bit of 6'2", 225, with these arms that just hang down to his knees, very long limbs. He's high cut. He's a thumper. He's a really strong tackler once he gets his hands on you. Always communicating pre-snap, literally barking at the linebackers, barking at the corners. You just love that kind of captain of the defense mentality. He thumped Shi Smith along the sideline. He went flying, tossed him into his bench. Another thump on Jalen Weidermeyer on a little shallow cross I put up on Twitter last week. nearly 600 special teams snaps in his career. Everybody wants this kind of long limb safety that can come down in the box, a la Jeremy Chin. And that really reminded me a lot of, the Sherwood style of play. A little slow to ID and trigger at times. He's a bit passive, but because of that, he is always under control. He's rarely fooled, never takes the cheese on misdirection. So there's a kind of a, point counterpoint to being slow to ID and trigger at times. But reminds me a little bit of Bernard Pollard or even Aaron Rouse, several years ago, just being these oversized safeties that could come down in the box with good athleticism. I just think this guy is really cut for today's big nickel type of sub packages.
Yeah.
In September, I always try to do a piece where, 5 bold predictions, 5 guys that could surprise as first rounders with a big year. And Darius was on that list. Was one of my 5, which is going to look smart. Who else? Joseph Osai from Texas, which that should hit. A couple other ones probably won't. Terrace Marshall is probably more of a second. Jordan Smith, the edge rusher from UAB, probably more of a day 2 guy. But the 5th one was Sherwood. And part of it is because the Auburn coaches would not stop talking about it. They love Jamie.
Yeah, it's funny
Sherwood.
You say that, Dane, because I wrote here, Dane said first round potential in October 2020. And when I watched his tape the other day, I couldn't find where I got that from. I scoured Twitter and your articles. For some reason, I couldn't find it. But I always like to throw in little nuggets of some draft analysts that I respect.
Yeah, no,
sometimes.
Yeah, well, so part of
At least we know he respects your opinion, Dane. That's a good thing.
Yeah, part of where I got that from was the coaches. They love Sherwood, and they thought, when scouts come through and they would talk to him about Sherwood, and they really thought he had a first round ceiling. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think more like 3rd round's probably more realistic, having done some work on him. Where'd you see him, Ben?
I think maybe very late day 2, if somebody falls in love with him, if he tests, out the roof or, whatever at Indy. He's a long limb kid. He's going to look really good in drills and running and stuff. And just a reminder to fans and scouts at home, they always say scout with your eyes, not your ears. But it doesn't mean you can't have your ears open as well. It's really hard to be a one-man scouting department and be in these kind of closed off circles. So anytime Fran says something, Dane says something, talks to people, coaches, buzz in the league, just make little notes, make little nuggets, put it in the bio, and you'll come back to it later. But, scout with your eyes, but it doesn't mean your ears have to be closed.
Well, when we started this conversation, I just sent a text and got the answer back. He got a 4th back from the advisory committee. So,
ooh, okay, good.
Just good thing to know.
There you go. All right, well, something to note away there on Sherwood. So my guy here for the film and recap is going to be one of the more interesting small school players that I've done so far. He was one of the first Senior Bowl acceptances from back in the fall. He did not play a snap this year due to COVID-19, and that's Grambling offensive lineman David Moore. Now, this is a guy who's 6'3", 320 pounds. He's a really compact build, all muscle. This kid only played 2 years of high school football down in Little Rock, Arkansas. I watched him from last year. I watched like 3 or 4 games from 2019. Guys, I was really, really impressed. He's a really impressive kind of a moldable ball of clay. Athletically, really jumps off the screen, like really, really fluid, twitched up athlete, gets out of his stance fast. He's outstanding out in space. He can pull off any kind of athletic block you need. But then you look at him from just a pure nasty standpoint, one of the best finishers I've watched of any of the offensive linemen that I've done. So you're talking about, okay, athletic tools are there. The mentality that you're looking for is there. He's just going to have to get caught up from the speed of the game. His hands, I think, are going to need some work, both run game and pass game. But teammates have gushed about him to the media. Really, really impressive athlete, natural bender, really flexible. He's able to recover in pass pro. Now, I mentioned what he can do out in space as well, and I just love the finisher's mentality. He's just, from a play speed standpoint, I'm excited to see what he looks like next week down in Mobile. But David Moore, I don't know if either of you guys have done him. Really, really fun player to study. I really enjoyed watching him, the offensive guard from Grambling.
I have not done him yet. He's on my list to do this week before the Senior Bowl. So it's going to be a big week for him. We talk a lot about these small school guys and how the Senior Bowl can be that that launching off point for them. We've seen it in the past, and there'll be some guys this year. And I definitely think Moore could be one of those guys.
I think I put on his tape in December, and the first Grambling tape kept shaking, and I just went on with the rest of my life. So
dude, you gotta go back and find another one.
Yeah, I'll get back to it.
Dude, it's really, really impressive. He flies out of his stance, and at 320 for a kid to move the way he does, really, really impressive. Let's go. Our last segment here in this one, and that's every once in a while we'll do a player comparison segment. We'll just kind of pick three. Each of us will pick a player and just a player comp that we like, because those can be difficult to place at times, but everybody loves player comparisons. And I want to stick at the receiver position in this one. Dane, I'll come to you. Is there a wide receiver comparison that you like off guys that you've done so far?
It's funny because I did Amari Rodgers, just like you did. And the guy that I kept coming up with was Deebo Samuel. And because, and I've mentioned this before, and, Ben, I know you've mentioned it too. He plays so physical. It's when you watch him, you feel that play strength. And when I watch Deebo Samuel, I see kind of similar things. Deebo, I thought, was maybe a little bit more juice to him, where Amari, I don't know that he has quite that same home run ability. He's a good athlete. He's plenty fast. Just ask the Notre Dame defense. But I saw a Deebo Samuel type of guy. And so, which is interesting because I know you had a different comp for him, Fran.
Yeah, I had Golden Tate. And watching Rodgers, the reason why I didn't go with Deebo is Deebo was just so thick. Like, even when you saw him in person, I mean, just when you say like built like a running back, I mean, Deebo was built like a thick running back. And I look at Rodgers, and I don't know that he's quite that big, quite that stout, but I think when you look at skill set wise, you're talking about the same kind of player. And Rodgers, what really stands out to me is just his competitiveness after the catch. I think he can win with the ball in his hands in a lot of different ways. Much like you talk about with Deebo, I just felt that he was probably a little bit further along in terms of being a receiver than Deebo. Deebo, you get the ball in his hands, let him work. I think Rodgers has a little bit more from a pre-catch standpoint than I think Deebo had coming out, but I think Deebo just brings a little bit more of that physicality and edge just from his pure physical build than Amari does.
No, that's interesting, and I think both of those Clemson receivers with him and Cornell Powell. I mean, they both play physical. There's no question about that, and they're both built pretty well for when you think of the receivers they've had with T. Higgins and Justin Ross, kind of the more leaner, athletic guys with size. Cornell Powell, Amari Rodgers, a little more stout, different types of receivers at Clemson.
Ben, who do you got for yours here this week?
Well, there's two receivers I really like. I've been pounding the table for these guys most of the college football season. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown is going to be a heck of a pro. We're going to look back on this kid taken in the third round and be like, how did he fall to the third round? He's going to be one of those guys. Had to deal with multiple quarterbacks in his career at USC, came over with JT Daniels, who was his high school quarterback, but then Matt Fink and Keaton Slovis. Long story short, reminds me a lot of Tyler Boyd. And he could mostly play from the slot. He can win outside the numbers at the catch point in the red zone. He can do some gadget stuff. Like, I think USC was down a running back or two last year, and they put him in the backfield, just like Tyler Boyd did often at Pitt. So I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, both 6'1", 190, that tall, long frame, long limbs, can win inside, outside, and the gadget stuff, the yards after catch. I just think that's a really good spinning image type of comp.
I like it. Yeah, I think Amon-Ra St. Brown, I would put him in the category of juniors I'm most excited to dig into, and because I have not done a deep dive yet on Amon-Ra St. Brown. So
make sure you put Demetric Felton in that category too. Okay.
I've done Felton.
Oh, you did? Okay, good.
Felton I did.
I feel great about my Naheem Hines comp because they're both receivers, moved to the backfield role. I think they're going to be studs on third down for somebody in the NFL.
I'm working on my top 100 for the Athletic this week, and it's so tough with those receivers in the 8 to 15 range or so. The Amari Rodgers, the Tutu Atwell,
just boggle them up every day. Just reshake them up.
Yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tylan Wallace. So there's so many. It just comes down to preference and maybe the type of receiver you're looking for, or what you value at the position. They have different strengths. Dwayne Eskridge is a guy that I don't think we're talking enough about. I think he's in that mix. So explosive. There were points. I mean, here's another comparison. There were points on his tape where you saw. I got flashbacks of T.Y. Hilton at FIU. I think they're a little different. I don't think that's a great apples to apples comp, but there were flashes of that with some of what he put on film. So it's a really interesting wide receiver group. It's those Auburn guys with Seth Williams and Anthony Schwartz. Yep. It's a really interesting a bag of receivers in that second to fourth round range.
Well, and also understanding the limitations of the tape, which this year I think draft Twitter particularly is going to be all over the place with these receivers because the limitations of the tape means you don't really get to know the kid. So to split a lot of these clumps and these ties on the board for NFL teams is you want to talk to the kid who's a student of the game, who's savvy at multiple positions, who's got it between the ears. And there's a lot of stuff that the average fans and the average scouting community doesn't have access to. So I think you're going to see a lot of these position groups kind of all over the place as far as opinions.
Yeah, I think when you look at that overall every year, I think that's important. I think this year in particular, it'll be extremely important. And the other big part that we don't talk about with potentially no combine is that's where like the big like group think and think tank, everybody goes out to, Prime 48 at night. Everyone's going to the different bars and steakhouses and who do you like? Who do you like? Who do you like? And, scouts are talking with media is talking with coaches. Everybody's sharing information. That doesn't happen. That part of it does not happen. And I think that'll have a trickle down effect to how ultimately
most GMs set their board up over some cocktail sauce at Elmo. So that's typically when the board first gets constructed.
No right, well, now I'm depressed because I'm gonna miss I'm gonna miss all that this year.
Yeah, exactly right. Oh, guys, let's get to our last segment here. It's time now to go on the clock.
On the clock.
All right, guys. So, like I said at the top of the show, a little bit of a different spin here for On the Clock. We're going to call it a tie, 6-6-6. That we ended with a three-way tie here, coming out of our weekly competition from the season. Season's over. It's time to turn the page. Let's now look to the future here in April, and we're going to try every single week here. I'm going to basically I'll give a little bit of inside baseball to our listeners. Basically, the way I have this set up is I've got 3 tabs open on my laptop that have little randomizers, right? Little like websites where you put in a bunch of selections. And one is going to be all 32 NFL teams. The other is every position in the game. And the other is the part of the draft. And so as we go here, it'll be Dane's turn first. And so today, I'm going to pick a position for Dane, a team for Dane, and a part of the draft. And we'll do that for all 3 of us each and every week. I think it'll be kind of a fun way to kind of put a different spin on this segment. And so that being said, Dane, you are on the clock, and I have already put in my randomizations here for your pick. And the last one, San Francisco, linebacker, round 2. And when I say linebacker, it is going to be an off-ball linebacker, not an outside pass rusher. I want a pure Mike or weak side linebacker. So you've got round 2 for the 49ers linebacker. They've already got Fred Warner there, and they've got some young players in the pipeline there. But who do you like here for the 49ers at linebacker?
Okay, so remember one of the first picks they made with that regime was that Reuben Foster pick in the first round, and that proved to be a whiff, but they bounced back because, you mentioned Werner. They also got Dre Greenlaw in the 4th or 5th round. So if they're going to address the position in the 2nd round this year, what about Chaz Surratt, North Carolina? The athletic versatility, when you study the tape, you see him blitz, you see him drop, you see him spy, does a little bit of everything. So as, San Francisco adding a big, smooth athlete like Surratt, that they could really groom to be a fit to use in different ways. I think that would work. It also maybe gives them a little bit of insurance. I think if, you can't work out that long-term deal with Werner, who I believe is entering a contract year. So, it gives you that athletic versatility and a bit of long-term insurance.
I feel like with them, since it's not a huge need, it would almost be like a situation where, hey, this guy was too good to pass up on. So like,
right.
Like a Nick Bolton kind of thing. Hey, he falls to us. We just couldn't pass him up. And I feel like he does kind of fit certainly what John Lynch likes. Fred Warner is entering a contract year, by the way.
I threw down Baron Browning as a round 2 selection for them at linebacker. Somebody with good speed, a good run and chase type of linebacker to pair with the length and size of a Fred Warner as well. I really see Browning similar to the way Fred Warner played at BYU.
And I'm almost done here picking yours, Ben. Ben, you have Buffalo Bills corner.
Buffalo.
All right,
corner.
So you have a cornerback, and this is outside corner. I did separate corner and nickel. So you have a corner, and early day 3 is your selection here.
Buffalo Bills corner early day 3. So this is a heavy zone scheme.
Yes.
Sean McDermott's defense. So that means we have Trey White's out there. We have Levi Wallace's out there. Dane Jackson out of Pitt. All these guys are kind of 4-5 types of corners. They love experience. I think Asante Samuel Jr. is going to end up going on day 2. So if I'm talking early day 3, I'm going to go with Cal corner Cam Bynum. This is a guy that has tons of experience, great instincts. He's a tough player, 42 games started, 2,700 snaps, really good FBI, understands route combinations, how he's attacked, really good leverage tackler, knowing where his help comes from, smart on misdirection and boot stuff. The only issue is he lacks the long speed. He lacks the ability to play the ball down the field. That's okay in Buffalo. I think he fits perfectly into a Sean McDermott type of scheme there. I almost went with Paulson Adebo, but I think Cam Bynum has got round 4 written all over him.
You mentioned Asante Samuel Jr. I actually kind of love that fit because
I just wasn't sure if he was going to make it a day 3. I think he might be one of the premier day 2 zone corners.
But his dad played for Sean McDermott in Philadelphia. So you always love those. Me, Ben, I'm always trying to connect those dots. As soon as you said that, my ears kind of perked up. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. That one definitely makes sense.
That was the first name I had written down, guys. But I was like, is he going to make it an early day 3? I'm just not really sure yet. Is he going to be in that Byron Murphy kind of round 2 ballpark? And that's kind of where I think he is.
Yeah, right, I agree. No, but it's interesting with Bynum because he's going to get killed when he doesn't. He doesn't have those huge combine numbers, but who knows if we'll even have those numbers to go on this year. We know he's not the best athlete, but strong, tough, smart, that could go a long way with certain teams. And the Bills, they could be one of them. I think they've had some inconsistency at that number 2 corner spot, whether it's Wallace or Dane Jackson. They're looking for, competition there, and Bynum would give it to them.
And that's not a team that prioritizes corner. They're not a team that prioritizes athleticism and speed at the cornerback spot with all the zone that they play. So, Ben, you mentioned all those names. Those guys weren't track stars at the combine. Those guys didn't, break 4.42 at the combine. I think that kind of makes sense. I like that fit.
I went and looked it up. Trey White ran 4.51. I thought for sure he was a 4.4 kid. Yep. Dane Jackson 4.57. Levi Wallace, I think, ran the 4.6s. Right. Josh Norman infamously ran in the 4.9s or whatever he ran in.
So for me here, I have the Cincinnati Bengals. I have a safety. And round 2. Now, for safety, I did not differentiate free safety, strong safety. And the way I'm looking at it is, look, they've got Jesse Bates. If they're going to take a second-round safety, it's going to be someone you're going to pair with him. So if he's playing single high, who's a safety that you could pair up with him, to play out closer to the line of scrimmage? They currently have Von Bell, I believe, playing in that role most of the time, Ben, if my memory serves, from when we played them back in week 3. Yep. Hamza Nasruddin, a guy that we think is a first-round talent. He's got the ability to line up everywhere. And I mentioned earlier that I'm going to have the UCF defensive backs coach. I'm going to have Hamza Nasruddin's defensive coordinator on next week. So we'll talk a little bit more about Hamza as well. But I think he's a guy that could fit into that scheme, in terms of, his overall usage. I think that he's the kind of player that ultimately could, do a lot of the same things that Von Bell does. And they could get a steal, in terms of if he was a fully healthy player, he probably goes earlier than that.
Well, I like the pairing with Jesse Bates. What does Jesse Bates do really well? Cover. What does he struggle doing? Running the alley, tackling. So I maybe want somebody with a little more coming downhill bulk. I had Talanoa Hufanga slotted here in the second round going to the Bengals. I think that's a little bit more of a segmented skill set, and that Bates can play back, Hufanga up. But with Hamza Nasruddin and Jesse Bates together, I think they're much more interchangeable to kind of yo-yo. They could each play on the back end, each really good savviness in coverage.
Like I said, go ahead, Ben.
Nasruddin's going to be really interesting with the medicals. He had that knee injury at the end of last year, came back this year and played in 2-3 games where he was starting to get back to full health, and so it's going to be interesting how much he's able to do Senior Bowl wise, and then what are the medicals going to say at the combine. So that's a safety that could be, quote unquote, a riser based off of how his pre-draft process goes.
I feel like this will be a fun segment to kind of wrap up the show each and every week, guys. Great stuff as always. We will talk to both you guys later this week.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
Well, good stuff there from Ben and Dane. Let's now wrap the show up here with Draft Mailbag. We've got a couple of 5-star reviews to get to. First one from Bear Cub Fan and from Philly Fan-AFS. Both guys just leaving notes saying how much they enjoy the show. Always cool to hear from fans of other teams. Bear Cub Fan, obviously from the Chicago area. And we actually got another fan from another team as well checking in. AM Cool left a 5-star review saying how much they love the show. And they talked about Jordan Renan's visit last week on the Blueprint segment late last week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. And, you're talking about, Jordan, he only repeats what's being told to him. I'll tell you what, those are the guys I want. I want the people on the show and for that segment that are being able to see, they're getting told stuff from the organization. They have an idea of how the organization is trying to build and how they're trying to attack the draft and the team building philosophy. So yeah, I don't care where Jordan got that information from. That's outstanding stuff. And he was able to, share that with us last week here on the Blueprint. So thanks. Appreciate all of you guys for leaving some support for us over on our Apple Podcast page. Like I said, if you've got a nice comment like that, or if you've just got a question, if you've got a mock draft, you can go onto our Apple Podcast page, leave it in there in the comment section. The queue is wide open. We will hit on it on the very next show. So really appreciate everybody that has gone on to do that. Hope you guys enjoyed that Blueprint segment last week. We're going to continue to roll these new segments out as we go through here in the pre-draft process. We're only starting here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Thanks so much. We will talk to you later this week. I've got a really good show lined up, really fun guest here. We're actually going to talk with Dan Shanka, who does a lot of scouting for the East-West Shrine Bowl. We'll talk to him later this week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Raise a glass to that comforting feeling of an Eagles touchdown with the all-new Broad & Pattison wine collection created in partnership with Wink. Featuring a Cabernet, a Rosé, and a Chardonnay. Broad & Pattison wines are the perfect pairing for any occasion. Now you can bring the sweet taste of victory with you to a dinner with friends or to the tailgate with your game day crew. Purchase online today at PhiladelphiaEagles.com/wine to stock up and have Broad & Pattison delivered right to your door. A portion of proceeds from every bottle benefit Eagles Autism Foundation.